Welcome to session 9 that continues and finalizes our ideas about Marx. I'll be walking you through some basic concepts. The first one is historical materialism, what it means, how materialism has developed over history. I'll also talk about basic concepts to help us place Marx's perspective in order. Now let's begin by saying that an important book that Marx wrote is the Communist Manifesto, and I'll ask that you all try to read that book, because for people who are radical scholars, who are Marxist thinkers, and who believe in socialism, the Communist Manifesto is like a Bible. So you can't say you are a Marxist scholar or you are a socialist, you believe in socialist principles, and you can't have that book. It's like your Bible. So I'll review. It's a very small book. It's not very big. You can read it within 3 days or 2, depending on your interest. So I'll talk about it and talk about some basic concepts, and then place Marxist sociology in perspective. Now, one particular phrase that is very interesting in the manifesto is that our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonism. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Now, this is the epoch of capitalism. That is all he was trying to say, because he was writing during the capitalist revolution, the first time capitalism emerged. Let me say that what we had in 19th century Europe as capitalism is qualitatively different from what capitalism is today. So sometimes you need to understand Marx from that perspective, because if you take capitalism today as it is, you miss what point Marx was making. What happened in that period was that two classes emerged on the scene, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And now during that time, workers were never allowed to unite, to form trade unions, to fight for minimum wage, or to fight for conditions of service. So they were really, really subjected to harsh conditions. And so nobody was talking about the environment in which they work. They could be subjected to extreme heat, and machines were not as modern and fanciful as today. Most of the machines, you have to enter the factory, turn it with your hands and all that. And a lot of them had their limbs and whatever, hands chopped off. Children were even pushed into industry where, because the machines, they needed small hands to turn certain parts of the machine, their hands got chopped off and all that. Women were also pushed. Basically, there was nothing like worker protection. So the industrialist was allowed by the system to subject human beings to these brutalities. And if those of you who have read some of the novels during this period, like Hard Times, Oliver Twist and all that, these were great times that they suffered so much. So two classes emerged. So workers were brutalized. Now, this is what disturbed Marx so much. It's not like today when government will come in and say, oh, there should be minimum wage, there must be minimum conditions or standards maintained in the factories and all that. Nothing was there. And so the workers who were previously peasants or serfs had a hard time in London, Manchester, and all the big cities in Europe. They were not catered for. So this is what angered Marx. So Marx saw that society was unjust and all that. Now, some basic concepts were emerging: class conflict, historical materialism, primitive communal stage, slave-owning society, feudal society, capitalist society. Now I'll talk about this. Now let's get this idea. You know, in olden days, maybe some parts of Africa may help to illustrate this point. Marx's idea is that the first society that human beings ever constructed was primitive communal societies. Now, in the earlier forms of society, primitive communal society is that there was nothing like private ownership of means of production. The most important factors of production that we need to make life, to sustain life in earlier societies were owned communally. For example, in Africa, we have retained some of these things. If you go to the villages, the most important thing everybody needs to survive is land. So long as you are strong, you must have land. You must cultivate crops. And so, such societies, nobody will claim that the land is for my father or is for me, or when I die, I hand over land. So in many of our traditional societies, you can farm as much as you want, but when you die, the land doesn't belong to your children. It's a lineage land. It's even protected for those who are yet to be born. Now, Marx's reasoning is that in primitive or traditional times, this is what pertained all over the world. So when people exist in such societies, they are working for themselves. Nobody is working for anybody. You see, that is why in our villages, life can be romantic in a way, because if you live in those societies, you can decide that, well, today I won't go to farm. Why? Maybe yesterday when you went to farm, you got enough food. So there's no need to exert yourself. So you are not working for anybody. So long as your farm activities sustain you, you are okay. You can sit under the tree, drink some palm wine, and then gossip in the village and all that. But Marx is saying that the moment we evolve the society beyond this stage, then we are seeing contradictions in the productive system. Now, if we all live in primitive communal society and everybody is producing for himself or herself, then nobody is producing for anybody. But with time, people want a situation where they don't want to produce at all. So in such a condition, what do? You are still agricultural society, so what do? It means you have to begin to own some people as slaves to work for you so that you can have the luxury of not working. Now, so over the history, most societies evolve into slave-owning levels, whereby some people were clever enough to begin to own others as slaves. Now, if you are a slave, you don't enjoy that freedom you were enjoying in the primitive communal society. Somebody is now not working. So it means that slaving for the person, you must produce over and above what you need first to survive, and leave some for the person who is owning you. Now, the emergence of this slave-owning society is a contradiction, because then there is a slave master and a slave. So you can see that in our attempt to produce material things for survival, we have begun creating trouble for ourselves. There's a contradiction now. Some people are becoming rich, some people are being poor. And this is the thesis and antithesis. Slave owners and slaves. They are standing in oppositional direction. They are opposing each other's interests. Because why should I be slave for you and always working from 5 o'clock, for example, to 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the evening, and then you don't do anything, and you take some of my production and live on? This is theft. This is what Marx is fighting against. Now, Marx's view is still that slave-owning society gave way to feudal society. Now, the feudal society is just a superior form of slave-owning society, Because see, during the slave-owning period, slaves could run away. There's contradiction. Slaves, you can't have control over all of them. Sometimes you cannot ensure their reproduction for you. So feudal society was emerged out of slave-owning society, whereby the landlords, those who have appropriated the land from which everybody now must subsist, have now turned the serfs to be serving them. And now the serfs were serving them on their estates. So he has a group of people called serfs. So they live on his land. So the serfs, because they don't have, or they didn't have land, they cannot live outside the arrangement. They cannot run away, because when you run away, all the lands have been privatized. So where do you actually go and farm? So you are bound to the Lord. And so the Lord ensures that he feeds you. Sometimes you stand as standing army for him, so that when there's crisis somewhere, he can even mobilize you to fight for him. So it is not too different from the slave-owning society. So we are seeing something like, once we bypass primitive communal state, we are having two major classes of people: slaves and slave owners, feudal laws and serfs. Now, Marx's reasoning is that feudalism also passed, and another system, economic system of production emerged. That is the capitalist system. And even in the capitalist system, we have capitalists, industrialists, rich people, and they've converted others to be industrial workers. And they are still exploiting the industrial workers and all that. So we see that throughout history, after we pass the primitive communal society, we are having two groups of people in the productive system of the economy: rich and poor, slaves and slave owners, proletariat versus capitalists. Now, this is what Marx is talking about as class conflict. Two classes. There's a conflict of interest. There's a contradiction. Now, Marx's reasoning is that since thesis and antithesis cannot exist, they have to resolve. The conflict between capitalists and the proletariat has to be resolved. But for him, it will be resolved and it will be final. So workers, the proletariat, Marx saw them as potential force for transforming society, of transforming capitalist society into a socialist society. So once there is a resolution of the conflict and contradiction between the capitalists and the proletariat, a new society or synthesis will emerge. So it will be socialist society, because the workers have suffered historically throughout all this period. They will not like capitalism to be in place again. All the things that matter in the economic institution will be given to the state to administer. So state will own everything. And from that level, no classes will emerge anymore. Everybody will be employee of the state. So you have bourgeoisie, extremely rich people throwing themselves around and all that. And the poor or the proletariat will also have a good deal in society. So as I said, the socialist society will finally be evolved into a communist society. Now, this recount, this description I've given you, is what we refer to as historical materialism. How have we produced things materially throughout history? So throughout history, we have entered into relationship with each other to produce material things for our existence. But then, in the process, we've made some people rich, some people poor, and the rich are exploiting the poor. So now, I would like to talk about some other basic concepts that we need to know. So in Marxist sociology, you can talk about the contradictions in the capitalist society. You can think about surplus value. Then you have use value and exchange value. These are all explained in the slides. But what it means is that because workers are made to produce over and above what it takes them to survive, then they are producing surplus. And that surplus is what the capitalist or the bourgeoisie is appropriating. So surplus value, for example, is just basically like this. When you are employed as a worker into the factory, Marx's view is that you'll be asked to produce some amount of goods. Let's say the amount of goods you produce that day is 5,000. Then, what the industrialist will pay you, maybe he's paying you only 500. 5,000 cedis worth of goods produced by one individual. But at the end of the day, you get the wage for the daily wage, 500 cedis. So the difference is simply what is surplus value. Because the guy has captured you to produce over and above what you will subsist on in a day. So this is what they will turn around and say, we have made profit. Marx believe that this is theft. You see, because in the primitive communal society, you only produce enough for yourself. That's all. You don't produce surplus value. But now, because some people want to be extremely rich, they have to tie you to a working condition, which makes you to produce so much, yet at the end of the day, you get so little. So even the idea that there's a minimum wage is actually a gimmick, because the worker produces more than that. You see, so if they say minimum wages in Ghana is 200, or let's say 500 Ghana cedis a month, it doesn't mean that the worker produces just 500 cedis of goods and all that in the factory. He's producing above all that. So the difference is the surplus value. So this is what the bourgeoisie will take out of you. So your labor power is exploited. And sometimes they have to keep your wages so low so that you are always in need of money. So you have to report for work. Because maybe if they give you so much, you can retire from the job. So labor, a reward for labor in the capitalist system must always be so small so that the worker is continuously in need of resources. And so the worker must report for work all the time, particularly in the conditions where he is dispossessed of land. You see, in a way, in Ghana or many parts of Africa, the workers here are not really industrial workers. You see, in South Africa, probably you heard that the whites took land away from the blacks. They took the fertile lands away, and it has generated so much tension in the society, apartheid system, rioting, the killing in Soweto and all that. You see, when the whites came there, Africans were living freely, maybe in their traditional societies and other. Land was abundant, so nobody was engaged in capitalist system of production. But when the whites came, they saw so much resources. They saw so much resources in South Africa. Now, because they have developed capitalist system from Europe, they wanted to exploit the resources. Now, in a situation like that, they wanted to convert the Africans into laborers. But you see, before you can convert Africans to be successful laborers, you have to dispossess them of the fertile land so that they cannot sit there, work, and be comfortable. That led to the land appropriation, so that the Africans were moved to the unfertile lands where they cannot survive. Agriculture will not do well. So now they are forced to come into industry, come to the white man's service. So they have to employ them, pay them, because if they allow them to retain the fertile lands, they will not show up for work. So that is why the apartheid system was there. So Africans were pushed to the infertile lands. And so they can now come. So this is how capitalism tricks people into working. After all, if there's gold in South Africa, what does it mean for blacks? At that time, they didn't value it so much. They used it for their ornaments and all that. But the Europeans came and saw all these resources. They needed people to go to go into the mines, down the earth, to work for them. So it makes sense not to put them on fertile lands, otherwise they'll never report. So this is what Marx is driving at, that when people want to make so much money out of you, they create conditions that frustrate your existence. So you'll be forced by necessity to work for them. That's the argument here. Now, capitalism, once it begins to develop, it transforms a whole system of our social living and all that. Money becomes the priority of everybody. Because in a capitalist society, you must have money. People do things in capitalist society for money. Previous times, previous civilization, people do things and say, oh, I did it for you because you are my uncle, or you are a chief, and all that, or for the sake of love. But in a capitalist system that developed, Marx's view is that even human relations will get commodified. It means that in our dealing with each other, we are being calculative how much we should make from each other. So our relation becomes commodity. You see, you know, in some parts of Ghana now, when you go, especially in the rural areas where capitalism or the life is still very traditional, if you are driving through those villages and something happens to you, you see the villagers will come around, help you, whatever be the case. They'll even just say, oh, thank you. You just say thank you to them, and you are gone. Because life has not become so capitalistic there. But you see, in Accra, the most modern part of Ghana, you see the commodification of human relations clearly. You drive through any of the streets in Accra, your car breaks down, you see the boys on the street selling. They quickly will rally and help you, maybe push your car to start again. But I tell you, most times the boys will cross the car again and say, Master, do something. So things we can do for even love, for the sake of sympathy, we are now commodifying. This is what Marx says, that human relations become commodified. Now, in a capitalist system, goods acquire some value as if we should worship them. These things are like goods matter. We collect goods, put in our houses, and all that. And things, they become like things we worship. They drive us. So we are leading to thingification of commodities and fetishism. I think these are two important concepts in Marxist sociology, which I trust you look at. The definitions are in the book, in the books that you are supposed to be reading. Then I talked about false consciousness already, false consciousness and class consciousness. Now, false consciousness for Marx is that people suffer such a capitalist system, but they are not aware about the real conditions that make them to suffer. Now, because they are not aware, Marx says that they are experiencing false consciousness. Now, if they become critical, they become aware, then they will now experience class consciousness. So we have two concepts, false consciousness and class consciousness. Now, a people who are experiencing false consciousness, Marx would describe them. Later Marxists would describe them as class in itself. So class in itself means that they are just like a class sitting down there. They are not aware about the objective conditions driving their world. So they are a class in itself. But when they experience class consciousness and they are willing to risk their heads, their legs, their limbs to fight the system, then that class transforms itself into class for itself. I think the terms must be understood. If you are in a class, let's say I am the bourgeoisie and you are the proletariat, and then I am oppressing you, but I've been able to create certain ideas around the class in such a way that you don't know I'm exploiting you, then you are a class in itself. But when a day comes and you become very conscious about how I'm exploiting you, then you have attained class consciousness. And when you are ready, willing to fight me, then you are a class for itself. It means you are a class that wants to fight for itself now. So those two terms must be understood. We talk about superstructure and substructure. We didn't talk about relations of production. The relations of production is the one that exists in the substructure. That is relations of production that is between the workers and the bourgeoisie. Forces of production, they are also within the substructure. That is the equipment, the technology, the raw materials that the industrialists bring together to produce. So these are the forces of production. Now, Marx's view is that in a capitalist society, the state, and this is in its own words, the state is an executive committee for managing the affairs of the bourgeoisie. What it means is that governments, states, when they are run in a capitalist society, get to know that they fight first and foremost for the interests of the rich, the industrialists, and all that. So that is why when there is a fight between a manager and the workers, the state will deploy its police force to go and protect first the property of the manager. So they'll lock out the workers. That is it. So even when it comes to law, the law that we talk about, is equality before the law and all that, Marx thinks that the law serves the interests of the rich before the poor. So we have Marxist interpretation of law. Even we can set our own example in Ghana here. There are so many things that the rich do, they get away. Let me tell you, we know the proverbial kickbacks. Somebody, a minister awards a contract. He gets 10 or 20% back for awarding. That 20 or 10% or 20% is a lot of money. This is white-collar crime. Now, we don't see this as criminal, but such behavior is pure corruption. This is the money they steal, make themselves rich in society. They drive around. Even we, the poor, respect them. We say they are honorables. They have stolen our money, you see. And then when the state, whenever there is a situation where some of them are caught, they have all kinds of committees set up, and then legal gymnastics. Sometimes with time, we forget about the incidents. They've made their money. The state is protecting them because those people who are in government, they are allies. This is the conspiracy. Now, they have deprived the state itself of resources that can be used to build maybe hospitals, schools, that people will benefit from in the rural areas. Hospitals that will serve our mothers so that when they go to give birth, they will not die. Somebody have done that. But when somebody steals a goat, a laptop, a fridge, a TV, by all standard, these things are just inconsequential in relation to what the ministers or the big guys are stealing. But you know how the law works. The poor guy, Marx will say that he's just struggling to survive in an exploitative capitalist system by taking those things, taking those actions. But the system will descend on them harshly. They will get 12 months hard labor just because somebody has stolen a television set. And how much is a television set in relation to 10%, 20% kickbacks? So the law, whilst proclaiming that everybody is equal in society, justice, you go to court, you see the symbols of judgment, balanced. By the time you are aware, the law is not working on the side of the proletariat, the masses. So the whole idea of Marx is that the capitalist system that has emerged is actually a system controlled by the rich, by the bourgeoisie, and they use the system to advance their interests, whilst the system works against the poor. You can now see the contradictions in the system, and Marx is calling for a synthetic transformation of society, which is moving away from capitalism to coming to socialism. Now, socialism did not exist during Marx's time. Communism did not exist, but it was Marx's prediction, because Marx believed that the society in which we are, it is the creation of human beings, because we've created what? Primitive communal society before. Then we created slave-owning society. We created feudal society. Why can't we go beyond capitalist society that is so abusive of workers and all that and create socialism? So this is the socialist stage and the communist stage are Marx's prediction that this is where the world will eventually tend to. So, but it is not going to be easy. Why? Because workers will continue to experience false consciousness, because the ideas that are floated around in other institutions like religion, politics, are meant to hide the exploitation. So on this particular note, Marx speaks on religion and says that the Christian religion is the perfect fit for capitalist societies. Why? Because, as I said much earlier, the church has been very dominant in Europe, even through the feudal society, the slave-owning society, and all that. And you remember they justify the social order in terms of religion. So don't be surprised when we read that the kings were divine kings, so that people do not challenge them, because the kings and the religious setup were conniving to exploit the peasants or the serfs. The religion of Christianity is a perfect fit for capitalist system of production. No wonder the West is all about Christian religion, because whilst the system produces poverty, suffering for others, then the religious ideas that are constructed in the superstructure tell us that blessed are the poor, because they will be the first to inherit heaven. This is the religion Marx is saying. So Marx thinks that religion is the opium of the masses, and opium is a drug giving people to experience hallucination, so that they don't know what really is afflicting them, what conditions they are in. So Marx views religion as the opium of the masses. And sociologists have been discussing this of late. Yeah. And so you see that there is a trend. The poorer the people, the more Christian religion appeals to them, because it gives them relief. At least they may take satisfaction in the fact that one day, they will be the first to go to heaven. So you have within the Bible statements written like that. I think it is easier for the camel to pass through the needle of the eye than for the rich man to go to heaven. They'll promise you heaven's infrastructure, what heaven offers, actually doesn't compare to even the riches here at all. So with such messages, the poor bear their poverty with humility and maybe with pride. This is why Marx is against Christian religion, that it is ideas circulated in them that justify exploitation. Now, Marx believed that the economy is so important. Those who control the economy in every society controls how society will work. So sometimes we read Marx as he's saying the economy determines everything in society. So that is why we say Marx is an economic determinist. Now, I would like to end on Marx on two issues: Marx and social inequality and social stratification. Marx views society basically as made up of those who have and those who do not have. And Marx thinks that this is social inequality, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Society is stratified into two main groups, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And Marx is not somebody who wants to endorse such a system. Because Marx believed that every society that we find is not naturally given. It is the product of our own laboring. We have constructed it. And so if there is inequality in the system, there is poverty, there is suffering, we must create society to correct all this. So this is Marxist perspective, in the sense that Marx is always critical, or has been critical of society. He wants to see fairness. He wants to see justice. So those who have come to think in terms of social justice, social fairness, equality, always use Marxist ideas for that. You know, in Ghana, we don't have many Marxist thinkers. Okay, we don't have many Marxist thinkers. Because now we've all become, what Mao would say, experiencing opium of the masses. We don't critique society. We don't critique our leaders. We don't talk about extremes of wealth and extremes of poverty. How do we create work on our society so that everybody will get a modicum of comfort? We don't. We praise very rich people, whether they are getting their money legal or illegally. And so we seem to be experiencing false consciousness. We may go to church, poor people, because we are not many in number. We make contribution. And some few people in the clergy who enjoy. They'll tell you your miracle is on the way. It is religion is the opium of the masses. Their miracle has come. Ours is always on the way. Every transition we make, crossover from one year to the other, they tell us next year is our year, and all that. If Marx were around today, he would tell us, oh, the religion they are using is the opium of us. Now, Marx is dead and gone, but Marxist ideas have been one of the most influential in society, in the world. People have used Marxist ideas to construct socialist societies. People have used Marxist ideas to fight oppression. That is no wonder that our first leader, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, was also Marxist to a great extent, that you use the state to ensure that there is welfare for everybody. So the state was going to do everything. So Marx is dead and gone, but we're saying that Marxist ideas inform many, many people's struggles in the world. Struggle from oppression. Struggle for independence. struggle for recognition. You hear these days we have feminist sociologists or feminist writers. They've used Marxist ideas to talk about the oppression women face in the world. So anytime countries want to dominate others, others tend to Marxism, to fight them. So Marx is dead and gone, but today we can say he's still relevant. So on that note, I will end basic ideas of Marx, and I trust that you will fill in the gap because a very exciting scholar. Thank you.